Hello, and welcome to Tyler Talks, where I talk about all things that I'm passionate about, like books and movies, and that's about it. Really, only books and movies. Today, we're going to discuss The Catcher in the Rye, but this won't be an ordinary discussion. Instead, I want to focus on one key argument surrounding this book that I've held for the longest time. The argument is The Catcher in the Rye should not be taught in high school. It is definitely a very weird claim on paper, considering The Catcher in the Rye and its long ties to teenagers, adolescents, and the preservation of youthful innocence. Basically anything within a high school environment. However, I firmly believe that teaching this book in a high school environment goes against many of the core messages being put forward by J.D. Salinger and by Holden Caufield. Before I get into this, I want to establish a few ground rules. We won't be talking about these two key things. Number one, we won't talk at all about J.D. Salinger, the author. We won't talk about the semi-autobiographical nature of The Catcher in the Rye, nor his more aloof or enigmatic personal figure. Number two, we won't talk about Salinger's style of writing or prose at all. Instead, the one and only thing we're going to be focusing on is Holden Caufield as a character. That's it. We just want to focus on Holden Caufield and how he directly ties to why this book should not be taught in high school. Many of you have probably heard the name Holden Caufield before, even if you haven't read The Catcher in the Rye. Holden Caufield is not just an iconic literary figure, but his name has become synonymous with teenagers and adolescents in high school itself. I mean, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of the word phony? You think of Holden Caufield. However, in order to explain why The Catcher in the Rye shouldn't be taught in high school, we have to get to the root of who Holden is as a character, what he represents, and how he interacts with the rest of the world. Let's begin with the basics. The story starts with Holden being kicked out of his prestigious boarding school Pensy for failing almost all of his classes except for English. Immediately, we are treated to Holden's biting pessimism to the world around him. He systematically breaks down everyone and everything, often labeling them as fake or phony. Why is this? How does Holden become the person who he is at the start of the story? Well, as we learn from the very first page, Holden's parents are completely preoccupied with their other things. Now, while they still are there and present and parental, they're often emotionally vacant and never try to get to the root of Holden's issues or Holden's problems or anything emotional with Holden. They're very surface level in their treatment of him. But we'll go more in detail with how adults are presented in the story later on in the video. His oldest brother, DB, is on the other side of the country writing movies, and his younger sister, Phoebe, who is only 10 years old, is maybe the only person Holden connects to emotionally in the story at all. It's really the only person he can be open with at all in the entire story. The thing is, though, Phoebe is only 10 years old, while Holden himself is 16. However, the most important part of Holden's character, and one that we learn through bits and pieces of the course of the narrative goes along, is that a few years before the events of the story take place, Holden's younger brother, Allie, died of leukemia. As we the readers see as the story plays out, Holden is someone who is still immensely grieving the loss of his brother. This is the lens in which we the readers view the world. It is a lens of a loss of childhood innocence and a loss of life. It is a lens of grief and mourning, and we view it from the perspective of someone who doesn't know how to process these emotions. There is this definite sense of the real world looming over every single interaction, scene, character, from Holden's perspective. But this doesn't even begin to answer why The Catcher in the Rye should not be taught in high school. Instead, we have to focus more on what Holden means when he calls everyone and everything phony. So we know that Holden is grieving over the loss of his brother, and he's confused at why the world has moved past Allie's death, but he hasn't. So why does he call everyone phony? And what does he even mean when he says the word phony? The technical dictionary definition of phony is when something is fraudulent or fake or not actually genuine. Thus, everything in the world to Holden is fake because Holden as a character represents a non-conformity to society's standard roles during the time when this book was published. Holden doesn't want to become what everyone expects him to be. There's this really great conversation towards the end of the book between Holden and his younger sister Phoebe, where Phoebe asks him, like, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, tell me one thing. And Holden, unable to think about anything, says he wants to be a catcher in the rye, which has more detail in the book, but essentially boils down to the fact that he wants to preserve childhood innocence. He wants to stop children running through the rye and falling off the cliff, with the cliff being this childhood innocence. He wants to stop children from experiencing the real adult harsh world. Now, there's definitely some commentary you can make about there. Is this a book, shielding kids from the truth about the world and the harsh realities of the world? And is that necessarily a positive thing? That doesn't necessarily matter. That's more of like Holden character study than really anything. But in terms of why this shouldn't be taught in high school, that kind of interpretation doesn't really play into this at all. It is why, though, at the beginning of the novel, Holden rejects all sorts of academic institutions and every single person who inhabits them. To Holden, all these people in these academic institutions are wearing a mask at all times, pretending to be something they're not, and engaging with people they don't like for some sort of undetermined societal gain. A societal gain that Holden doesn't want to be a part of. It's a societal gain that, when this book was written, would propel someone into more of an elite socioeconomic status. However, Holden, as we said before, is a non-conforming character. He views these people as fake because they want to take the standard route to success and the standard route to development. So how does Holden perceiving the world as phony tie into this book and tie into why it shouldn't be taught in school? Well, schools by their very nature are centered around conformity. Think about standardized testing. Schools, not all of them, but a majority of them, want to remove the individual in favor of a collective. Thus, they clash with one of the key ideologies of Holden's character. But what about phonies? Do you remember your time in high school? I sure do. I was always wearing a mask. I was always hiding who I truly was out of fear of being bullied, judged, or looked down upon. I, by Holden's definition, would have been a phony. I was not my truest self. Now, I don't imagine this is everyone's experience in high school, but I feel like it is for a majority of people, and I feel like it's reflective of our society as a whole. How can a book that is so focused on illuminating our problems with society be taught and organically enjoyed in the very institution that Holden is seeking to break down? I would argue this book can't be authentically enjoyed in this environment. Again, this isn't the case for everyone, but I know I enjoyed this a lot more reading this outside of high school than I did in high school. I enjoyed this so much more reading this at my own pace and my own leisure than I ever did in my English class. The final element as to why this book shouldn't be taught in high school is Holden's interactions with the adults in the story. To put it simply, every single adult in this story fails Holden or leaves him in an even worse state than when they initially found him. As I said before, his parents are emotionally vacant, and the first adult we see in the story, that being Mr. Spencer, Holden's high school history teacher, lectures him about why he's failing and his failed prospects and the harm he's doing to himself by failing and not applying himself to school, rather than get to the root of why Holden is failing at all. Instead, he just lectures Holden, never really giving an opportunity to speak, and seemingly berates his decisions to never apply himself. Whether Holden realizes it or not, he is desperately seeking someone for some sort of connection or some sort of guidance in order to help him process Allie's death. It's why we see him ask questions and try to interact with anyone and everyone. It's why he pushes people away only to be lonely and try to get them back. It's why he asks cab drivers where the ducks go when the lagoon freezes over, or why he buys a prostitute and then doesn't want to sleep with her, but instead just talk to her. This ultimately leads to the girl's pimp Maurice, who lied about the price of the girl, attacking and beating Holden. Granted, Holden did insult him first, and the guy warned him. It was kind of all this different stuff. It was a whole crazy scene. But this also cements a further ideology that Holden holds, that adults are phony, adults are fake, adults will lie and cheat to get what they want. It just perpetuates the themes of the story and Holden's perception on the world even further. Even people slightly older than Holden, like Carl Luce, seemingly berate Holden for his curiosity and his questions. And again, granted, Holden was pestering Luce about his sex life, but this is stuff that Holden has admitted that he doesn't understand, that he doesn't know how to process. Holden is seeking guidance only for everyone to slap him in the face and push him away and kick him to the curb. No one will help him, and no one will answer any of his questions about anything. It's kind of a sad existence. Holden's lack of guidance or emotional connection lead him down to a lonely path. All of this desperation and loneliness in seeking a connection culminates when Holden goes to seek shelter for the night with his old English teacher, Mr. Antolini. Even when Mr. Antolini treats Holden with some sort of affection, Holden doesn't know how to process it. freaks out and runs away. There is some ambiguity with the intention of Mr. Antolini. I get it. The book uses the word petted and patted, which can have some sexual connotations to it, but from the way I see it, Mr. Antolini was someone who was caring for Holden in almost a parental or paternal way, and Holden freaked out, has never had that before, and booked it away. But the big kicker is, even during that scene where Mr. Antolini is treated as the one person who is giving some sort of honest communication with Holden, he's still lecturing Holden about what kind of person he's going to become, or what kind of path he's headed. Mr. Antolini never stops to ask Holden what's going on. Even Mr. Antolini, the one adult who us as readers can seemingly trust and go, okay, this person is being normal with Holden, still lectures Holden. No adults treat him with respect. Mr. Antolini doesn't even try to grasp Holden's perspective. Holden is a young kid who has to process and struggle with a traumatic life experience with zero support systems, and he's failing because of that. So what is being said here about adults? Well, it all feels like this story is a culmination of a bunch of different things. Well, it all feels like it's simultaneously a story about grief, preserving childhood innocence, nonconformity, and maybe even a little bit the failure of some adults. Holden's interactions with adults shed light on their constant failures to connect with teenagers and their struggles. Holden is showing that they fail to provide proper support. By calling adults phonies, Holden is showing that even though they were once teenagers and able to connect with the issues that he's going through today, they can't anymore because they've fallen prey to the adult world and become part of the collective. So, how does this all tie into high school? Who teaches the book to these kids? Who dictates the conversation, breaks down assignments to read for homework? Who leads conversations and validates or even discourages someone's opinion in the book? Teachers! Adults! People that the book is criticizing can't properly teach this book to students because what Holden is saying is that they no longer connect with the story and issues being told. The Catcher in the Rye should not be taught in high school because it is a story that systematically rejects the very institutions that it's introduced to many kids in. This book shouldn't be taught in high school because by being taught in high school, it betrays the true essence of its themes. For a book where many of its themes are nonconformity or the failure of adults, to teach this book in an environment that contains those very ideas raises the chances that students are unable to feel fully comfortable or become fully engaged in this book in this very environment. How can we present teenagers with this type of book, a book that tells them who they are at that age, and ask them, just have fun with it? We can't. It's not fair to them. The Catcher in the Rye is a book that needs to be experienced organically, not broken down chapter by chapter in some specific way in this type of institution. This is a rare book that people need to find on their own, and it can't be something that's forced down their throat. If this book is presented to students in this way, and this is not for everyone, there is a solid chance they're gonna reject it entirely. And why wouldn't they? The book rejects the very environment they're learning in. If this book is taught in high school, it is doing these students and this book a massive disservice. I love The Catcher in the Rye. There is so much more I can talk about this. In preparation for this video, I read it again for a third time, and I loved it even more. I don't expect everyone here to agree with my argument. I actually expect a lot of people to disagree with my argument, but that's the great thing about this, is I want to hear everyone's discussions about this book. If you have any thoughts about it, put in the comment section down below. I want to hear about it. I want to hear about your thoughts in it. Many of you guys might not like this book, and I want to know why. I'm fascinated by the dislike of this book, and I'm fascinated by the love and adoration this book has. So that's the end of my argument. That was my hypothesis. That was my developed thesis. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget that my friends and I, Matt and Mark, have a film podcast that you'll find in the comment section down below. If you feel like it, go take a look at it. Go let us know what you think. Also, go check out Matt and Mark. They have great channels. I'll put everything in the description down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you again soon.